She served him coffee for weeks. The single mom waitress had no idea. He was an Italian mafia boss. The 6 a.m. alarm was violent Callie Ortiz never got used to. At 29, she felt older than the cracked linoleum floor of her kitchen. She lived in Camden Point, New Jersey, a place that clung to the edge of Philadelphia like a barnacle. It was a town of gray skies, rust-colored container ships, and the constant metallic groan of cranes. This was a place of night shifts and limited opportunities, smelling of diesel and the Delaware River at low tide. Callie was a single mother. Her life, her entire world, was a 5-year-old girl named Rosie. She pulled her hair back into a tight ponytail, the elastic snapping against her wrist. Her reflection in the dim bathroom mirror showed tired eyes, but a stubborn jaw. She worked the morning shift at the Harbor Light Diner, a classic, chrome-sided box parked right against the docks. It was a place where truckers left mud on the floor, dock workers argued over sports, and the coffee was perpetually burnt. Tips were a gamble, entirely dependent on whether the longshoreman had gotten overtime. Every dollar mattered. The medical bills from her mother's last year of life were a mountain range she couldn't see the top of. Rent was always looming. That was why she'd taken the extra shift today, covering for a girl who'd called out. More hours meant less time, but more time meant eviction. She fumbled with her phone, her thumbprint failing twice on the cracked screen. A new message from Mrs. Petrov, the older woman who watched Rosie. Callie opened it, her breath catching until she saw the video. Rosie, her dark hair a wild mess, was holding up a stuffed bear. Callie pressed the phone to her ear, ignoring the video call protocol, just needing the sound. "Mama, Mr. Snuffles is sick. He needs the doctor," Rosie whispered, her voice still thick with sleep. "Give him a kiss for me, baby," Callie whispered back, her throat tightening. "I'll check on him when I get home. Be good for Mrs. Petrov." She ended the call, the silence of the apartment rushing back in. She was wary of men, but not because she was running from a violent past. Her caution was simpler, more profound. Rosie's father had walked out when the allergy tests came back, a long list of expensive needs for a child he wasn't prepared to handle. Callie had no space, physically or emotionally, for another adult who might bring chaos into her daughter's fragile stability. The rain started as she locked her door, a cold, miserable drizzle that matched the sky. The harbor light was steamy and smelled of frying bacon. The first 2 hours were a blur of coffee refills and plating toast. Then, at 10 minutes past 8, the bell above the diner door jingled, letting in a blast of cold, wet air. It wasn't a trucker. 3 men entered, shaking water from coats that cost more than Callie's car. They were so out of place in the worn vinyl booths that the diner seemed to fall silent around them. They wore dark, impeccably tailored suits. The man in the lead moved with a silence that was almost unnerving. He was tall, with the kind of severe, classic Italian features that belonged on an old coin. His black hair was cut short, precise. His eyes, dark and heavy-lidded, scanned the diner once, cataloging everything. He looked bored, controlled, and intensely present all at once. His name, though she did not know it, was Stefano Puglisi. To Callie, he was just a businessman looking for a dry place to talk. He chose the booth by the window, the one that looked directly out over the container yard and the access road to the port. His 2 companions, broad-shouldered and silent, sat opposite him, leaving the space beside him empty. They did not look at the menu. Callie grabbed a pot of fresh coffee and 3 mugs, smoothing her apron. "Morning, gentlemen. Can I get you started with some coffee?" The 2 silent men looked at the man by the window. He looked up at her, and the full force of his gaze landed. It was not a leer. It was not flirtatious. It was appraisal. It felt as if he were scanning her, reading the exhaustion in her posture and the chip in her front tooth. It lasted maybe 4 seconds, long enough for her skin to prickle with discomfort. "Black," he said. His voice was a low rumble, laced with an accent that was part Brooklyn, part something older. The Italian way, no sugar, no cream, very hot. "You got it." She poured the dark liquid into his mug. He watched her hands, the way her knuckles were red and chapped. "And for you," she asked the other 2. "The same." One of them mumbled, barely looking at her. Callie noted the dynamic instantly. It was a skill every waitress learned. The man by the window was the center of gravity. The other two were just satellites. Their suits were armor, but his was a uniform. This was a man used to people stopping talking when he started. She went back for their order, but they didn't order food. They just sat. The man by the window sipping his coffee and looking out at the rain-slicked port. He was observing the trucks lining up, the security gates, the precise timing of the guard rotations. Callie just saw a traffic jam. He saw a chessboard. She kept her distance, wiping down the counter, loading the industrial dishwasher. "I just served the coffee," she told herself. Whatever Shark Tank business deal they were cutting was not her problem. She didn't know that the Harbor Light Diner was the single best vantage point for observing the territory he intended to claim. She didn't know he was Stefano Puglisi, the new head of a very old organization, and he was deciding how to expand his family's control of the Camden port. Her phone buzzed in her apron pocket. She ducked behind the counter, pulling it out. It was a voice message from Rosie. She pressed play. A small, lisping voice filled her ear. "Mama, buy me the blue shoes, the shiny ones, please." A small, involuntary smile touched Callie's lips. The blue shoes, they were $50 she did not have. But that voice was the fuel. That was why she stood here, pouring coffee for men who looked through her. The men in the booth paid in cash, a $100 bill left on the table for a $9 check. Callie pocketed the tip, her heart thumping with gratitude, not questioning it. As they left, the man in the lead, Stefano, paused at the door, looking back at her one last time. It was the same analytical stare. Then he was gone, disappearing into a black Cadillac Escalade that idled at the curb. Callie turned back to clearing the mugs, her mind already on the blue shoes. She never noticed the other vehicle. Parked 2 blocks down, a dark charcoal SUV with Pennsylvania plates, sitting too long in a no parking zone. Inside, a man with a telephoto lens lowered his camera. He had not been filming the diner. He had been filming the man in the expensive suit, the man who just drank the coffee. The government was watching. He came back, the next day, and the day after that, 8:10 in the morning. As predictable as the tide, the black Escalade would pull up, its windows tinted to an opaque, menacing darkness. He would enter, usually alone now, though his companions always remained in the idling vehicle. He always took the same booth, the one by the window, his back to the wall, his eyes on the port. To Callie, he became Mr. Window Booth. In the ledger of her mind, he was her most reliable tipper. The $100 bill left for a $3 coffee became a strange, quiet ritual. That first tip bought Rosie the shiny blue shoes. The second covered the copay for Rosie's allergy medication. The third went straight to the electric bill. Callie stopped questioning the amount and simply accepted it as a bizarre stroke of luck. A wealthy eccentric with a caffeine habit. He was a silent customer. He drank his coffee slowly and watched the endless parade of trucks and cranes. But Callie soon began to feel the weight of his attention. It was different from the leering stares of the truckers or the dismissive glances of other business types. He noticed things. She saw him watch her hands when she balanced the heavy oval tray, packed with platters of eggs and home fries. He noted the quick, unconscious flex of her fingers, the way she shifted the tray's weight from her left wrist, the one that always ached to her right. He saw the way she braced her lower back against the counter's edge when the diner was slow, just for a second of relief. He saw the flash of anxiety, then profound relief, on her face when she checked her phone, hidden below the counter, after getting a message from Mrs. Petrov. One humid afternoon, the air thick and sticky. He saw her hook a thumb under the strap of her apron, pulling the damp fabric away from her neck. It was a small, human gesture of discomfort, and his eyes registered it before dropping back to his cup. Callie felt seen, and it was a deeply unsettling sensation. On a Tuesday, as she refilled his cup, he finally spoke about something other than coffee. "The apple pie," he said. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the diner's clatter. "Is it made here?" Callie paused, coffee pot in hand. "It is. Marge, our night cook." Makes 3 every morning. It's our best seller. You want a slice? He nodded. Please. She brought it over. He took a single, deliberate bite. Considering it, it's good. Authentic. He looked up, and that analytical gaze was back. Are the schools in this area any good? The question was a sharp, unexpected turn. The schools, she repeated, wrong-footed. Kindergartens, he clarified, his dark eyes unblinking. For a colleague's child, they are considering a move to the area. Callie's posture tightened. A man who dressed in $1,000 suits and rode in armored cars was not asking a waitress about the public kindergarten system in Camden Point. They're okay, I suppose, she said, her voice becoming carefully neutral. Rosie, my daughter, she's not in one yet. She's with a private sitter. The public lists are long. I see, he said, and returned to his pie. The conversation was over, but the question left a small, cold knot in Callie's stomach. The knot tightened into real alarm on Friday. It was payday for the dock workers, and the lunch rush was chaotic. A trucker, his face flushed and smelling of the beer he'd had for lunch, had been waiting too long for his check. As Callie rushed by, he grabbed her wrist. His grip was strong and greasy. Hey, sweetheart, where's my bill? I'm not waiting all day. Let go, Callie snapped, trying to pull her arm back without dropping the scalding coffee pot in her other hand. I'll get it right now. Just let go of me. Just wait a minute. I'm talking to you. Before Callie could even shout for Sal, the grill cook, a shadow fell over the table. Stefano was standing there. He hadn't moved quickly, but he was suddenly just there. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't even look at the trucker's face. He looked at the man's hand clamped on Callie's arm. Release her, he said. 2 words. It was not a request. It was an order, delivered with the flat, cold finality of a closing door. The trucker, a big man used to intimidation, looked up at the man in the tailored suit. He saw the absolute lack of fear or anger in Stefano's eyes. He saw only a vast, chilling stillness. The trucker's bravado vanished instantly. He released Callie's wrist so fast it looked like he'd been stung. Just get me the check, he stammered, shrinking back into the vinyl booth. Stefano did not move until Callie was safely behind the counter, rubbing the red marks on her skin. Then, as if nothing had happened, he returned to his own booth, sipped his coffee, and looked back out the window. Callie's heart hammered against her ribs. One part of her was flooded with a dizzying, embarrassing wave of relief. The other part was furious. She was used to handling men like that, a sharp word, a threat to call the cops, a shout to Sal she had her system. She was a single mother. She was defined by her ability to handle her own problems. To be handled for made her feel weak, and it made her feel indebted. He left soon after. The usual $100 bill was on the table, but this time it was folded neatly over a stiff, cream-colored business card. The embossing was black and severe. Puglisi Atlantic Logistics Group, Stefano Puglisi, CEO. It looked professional, solid. But when Callie searched the company name on her phone during her break, the internet returned nothing. No website, no business registration, no industry news. The company, it seemed, did not exist. She was wiping down the counter, watching the rain start again, when she saw him stop by his Escalade. He didn't get in. He took a call, turning his back to the diner, facing the port. He was speaking Italian. Callie couldn't understand the language, but the tone was utterly transformed. This was not the quiet man in the booth. This voice was sharp, cold, and clipped. He gesticulated with one hand, a short, chopping motion. She could only catch a few words that sounded familiar through the thick diner glass. She thought she heard him say Camden and Port, and then, unmistakably, the acronym UCFD. As he listened to the reply, his expression shifted. A small smile touched his lips, but it was nothing like a smile she had ever seen on a customer. It was cold, thin, and completely devoid of humor. It was the smile of a man who had just confirmed a victory, or perhaps ordered a defeat. The sight of it made her shiver. Just then, Mike, the bread delivery guy, dropped his crates on the counter. "Woo! "That's a heavy hitter," Mike muttered, nodding toward the Escalade as it finally pulled away. "What do you mean?" Callie asked, trying to sound casual. "He's just some logistics guy." Mike snorted. "Logistics. Yeah, that's a word for it. You know who that is." "Right, that's Puglisi. My cousin does construction in South Philly. Says the Puglisi family is the Philly Mafia, the real deal kind. They say he's the new boss. Smart, not nice." The word mafia landed in the pit of Callie's stomach like a stone. It was a word from movies, a word that meant violence and cops and trouble. That night, long after Rosie was asleep, Callie sat at her small kitchen table. She looked at the $50 bill she had saved for the blue shoes, and then at the new, crisp $100 bill from that morning's tip. It suddenly felt dirty, dangerous. She thought of the non-existent company. She thought of his cold smile. She thought of the acronym UCFD. This was exactly the kind of chaos she had sworn to keep away from Rosie. A man like that didn't just bring generous tips. He brought men with guns, and he brought men with badges. He brought the kind of trouble that a single mother in Camden Point could not survive. In her small, budgeting notebook, on a blank page, Callie wrote a new rule. Avoid Mr. Window Booth. Do not engage. He's not a customer. He's a problem. She was done. He could keep his money. She had a daughter to protect. A bitter nor'easter swept in off the Atlantic, driving a knife-cold wind through Camden Point. It wasn't the snow that was the problem. It was the ice. At 2 a.m, a transformer blew, plunging Callie's apartment complex into a frigid, profound darkness. When she woke for her shift, the air in her apartment was Arctic. The real panic, however, hit when she opened the refrigerator. The faint yellow light was gone, replaced by a lukewarm silence. Rosie's specialized milk, the expensive soy-based kind that didn't trigger her allergies, was spoiled. The small stash of groceries Callie had carefully budgeted for the week was a total loss. Her hands were shaking, partly from cold, partly from a sudden, white-hot anger. She made a call, her voice tight and low as she stood in the dark. "Maria," she whispered to Mrs. Petrov, "the power's out. I lost all her food. All of it. I don't get paid until Friday. I don't know what I'm going to do." She hung up, not waiting for an answer, feeling the pressure build behind her eyes. She worked the first 2 hours of her shift in a fog of quiet desperation. Stefano Puglisi did not arrive at his usual time. A small, guilty part of her was relieved. She had followed her own rule, avoiding his gaze, offering only curt, professional service. It was better that he was gone. At 9:30, Sal, the grill cook, motioned her over. "This was taped to the diner's front door when I got in," he grunted, handing her a plain white envelope. "Just said the morning waitress on it." Callie wiped her damp hands on her apron. She tore it open. There was no card, no note, just a stiff plastic gift card for the local supermarket. She flipped it over. The balance, printed in small black numbers on the back, was $500. Her breath hitched. She had to lean against the counter. It wasn't Sal. It wasn't a random customer. It could only be him. He hadn't been to the diner, but he knew. The realization was chilling. Had he heard her panicked call? Did he have someone watching the building? It was a gesture of immense generosity, delivered with the cold, unsettling precision of a surveillance operative. He observed her need, met it overwhelmingly, and demanded nothing in return. It wasn't kindness, it was control. He finally arrived just after 10, walking with a stiffness that was not usual for him. As he slid into the booth, his dark suit jacket pulled tight across his shoulders, revealing a thick white bandage wrapped around his forearm, just below the elbow. A dark crimson stain was beginning to seep through the gauze. Callie's resolve to avoid him evaporated. The words left her mouth before she could stop them. A simple, human reflex. "Are you okay?" Stefano looked up, his expression unreadable. Though a flicker of surprise passed through his eyes, it was the first time she had initiated any conversation. "It's nothing," he said, his voice a low gravel. He instinctively pulled his cuff down to cover the bandage. She stood there, coffee pot in hand, not moving. He sighed, a barely audible sound, as if acknowledging her right to ask. "A disagreement at the construction site," he said, glancing out the window at the port. "Sometimes people, they don't agree with what I'm building." It was a blatant euphemism. Callie knew he wasn't talking about union disputes. He was talking about the whispers Mike the delivery guy had mentioned, the Bratva del Porto, the rival Russian outfit rumored to be challenging his claim on the shipping lanes. He was talking about disagreements that were settled in a way that left stains on bandages. The $500 card felt heavy in her pocket. She couldn't just serve him coffee. When she returned, she brought his black coffee in a small, separate plate. "This isn't from the diner," she said, or her voice quiet. "I made it. It's to say thank you for the card. You really didn't have to." It was a slice of her own homemade apple pie. He looked at it, then at her. He picked up the fork. "My Nona always said you could trust a person who bakes their own bread," he murmured, mostly to himself. He took a bite. The tense, coiled energy that always surrounded him seemed to loosen, just for a moment. "This is better than bread." A small, reluctant smile touched her face. "Rosie, my daughter, she likes it. She loves watching the ships, too. She calls the big cranes steel dinosaurs." He stopped eating. He watched her, his focus absolute. He listened with an intensity that was almost unnerving, as if this small detail about her daughter was as vital as a cargo manifest. "She sounds smart." "She is," Callie said, the pride in her voice warming her. His expression shifted, the brief warmth receding, replaced by that familiar, analytical focus. "Her father?" he asked. It was not a question. It was a demand for information. "Where is he?" The question was blunt, but she felt no need to lie. He had paid for the answer 500 times over. "He left," she said, her voice flat, emotionless. "He was excited when I was pregnant. Then Rosie was born. And the doctors started finding things. The allergies, severe, needs special formula, EpiPens, constant watching. It was a lot of bills, a lot of work. He didn't sign up for that, so he just disappeared. No big fight, he just walked away." Stefano was silent for a very long time, his jaw tight. In his world, family was non-negotiable. A man who abandoned his own child, especially a sick one, was not a man at all. He was a ghost, a coward. He looked at Callie, truly looked at her, the exhaustion, the chapped hands, the fierce set of her jaw. He saw a woman who stayed in the rigid old-world code Stefano lived by. Such a woman was sacred. The protection he felt for her deepened, settling into his bones. "His loss," he said finally, pushing the empty plate away. That night, Callie's apartment was warm. The fridge was full of Rosie's special yogurt and milk. She had even bought her daughter a new winter coat. When she and Rosie returned from Mrs. Petrov's, however, she saw it immediately. The wood around her apartment door lock was splintered. There were deep scratches in the metal. Someone had tried to force the door. Her heart leaped into her throat. She pushed the door open, her mind racing. "Rosie, stay in the hall." She scanned the tiny apartment. Her old laptop was still on the table. The small jar of emergency cash was still in the kitchen cabinet. Nothing was gone. Rosie's room was untouched. Then she saw it, sitting perfectly centered on her kitchen counter. A single, official-looking business card. It was thick. Cream-colored cardstock. An embossed federal seal shone under the dim light. UCFD, Urban Crime Field Division. She turned it over. A message was written in neat, impersonal block letters. "We need to ask you about your frequent Italian guest. We will be in touch. The floor fell away." This was it. The government. They weren't just watching him. They were watching her. They had been to her home. They had jimmied her door. A wave of nausea rolled over her. She thought of her daughter, in this country. For a single mother with no savings, a federal investigation was a death sentence. They could look at her hours, her unstable income. They could decide she was unfit. They could decide her association with a man like Stefano made her a danger to her own child. They could take Rosie, the generous tip, the vague warnings, the pie. It all curdled into terror. She knew, with a sickening certainty, what she had to do. She would go to the diner tomorrow, and when Stefano Puglisi walked in, She would tell him, for the sake of her daughter, to never, ever come back. Her shift was a 9-hour wire of tension. The UCFD card was in her pocket, a stiff, rectangular weight against her leg. Callie rehearsed the words in her head, wiping down counters that were already clean, refilling salt shakers that were already full. "Please don't come back. You're putting my daughter at risk. Please." He arrived at 8:10, just as the rain was turning to wet, heavy snow. But something was different. The black Escalade idled at the curb as always, but his two shadows, the men who sat like statues, remained inside. Stefano walked into the diner alone. He slid into the booth, his back to the wall, and took off his leather gloves, placing them neatly on the table. He looked up at her, expecting his coffee, the fact that he had come alone, vulnerable, to a public place. Through her rehearsed speech off balance, it was a sign of trust. It meant he saw this diner, saw her, as a safe zone, and she was about to detonate it. She walked over, the coffee pot in her hand, but her grip was so tight her knuckles were white. She didn't pour. "I can't serve you anymore," she said. Her voice was a low, shaking whisper. Stefano's gaze lifted from the menu he never read. He didn't look angry. He looked curious. Callie. She pulled the UCFD card from her apron and slid it onto the table. "They came to my apartment," she said, the words rushing out. "They picked the lock. While Rosie was at her sitter's, they left this on my kitchen counter." His face did not change, but a cold stillness settled over him. He did not look at the card. He looked only at her. His first question was not about the feds, not about the lock, not about himself. "Did they mention your daughter?" he asked, his voice flat and dangerous. The question caught her off guard. "No, not by name. They knew I had one. They wanted to ask about you, their frequent Italian guest." He finally picked up the card, glanced at it with dismissive contempt, and dropped it. "So they let themselves into your home, the place where your child sleeps." He said it quietly, as if confirming a fact. "That is a line they do not get to cross." "This is what I mean," she insisted, her fear making her bold. "This is what you bring. I'm just a waitress. Stefano, I am not part of whatever this is. I don't want my daughter watched. I don't want men breaking into my apartment because of the coffee you drink." He let her finish, his dark eyes never leaving her face. He absorbed her anger, her terror, and he did not deflect it. "You are right," he said. The simple apology from a man this powerful was more disarming than any defense. "This should never have touched you. Let me make it right. Let me ensure they do not and cannot touch her again." "How?" she shot back. "By scaring them. That just puts me deeper in." "By moving you," he said. "The wiring in your building is unreliable. The power fails. My company, the logistics group, we maintain corporate apartments, safe houses. They are clean, secure. I can have you and Rosie move this afternoon. They will be checking your electricity." Callie recoiled as if he'd slapped her. "Moved? You mean hidden?" "No, absolutely not. I will not be indebted to you. I am not one of your people." "This is not about debt," he said, a sharp edge of frustration in his voice. "It is about her safety. I can handle our safety." Callie pulled her phone from her back pocket, a nervous, defiant gesture, just to check the time, to ground herself. The screen lit up. The wallpaper was a photo she'd taken last week, Rosie, grinning a gap-toothed smile, wearing the shiny blue shoes, a smear of chocolate ice cream on her cheek. Stefano's gaze dropped to the small, glowing screen. The hard, controlled lines of his face softened. It was a profound, almost imperceptible shift. The ice in his eyes thawed, just for a moment, replaced by something Callie could not name. It was not the predatory hunger she'd seen from other men. It was gentler. It was the look of a man who understood value, a man who, despite the violence he clearly knew, still recognized true innocence. For the first time, Callie's own heart gave a strange, insistent lurch. It was the most dangerous feeling of all, not attraction to his power, but to the sudden, shocking realization that a man with blood on his hands could have a soft place for a child. "I can't," she whispered, her anger deflating, leaving only exhaustion. "I have to finish my shift." She walked away from the booth. He did not protest. He just watched her go. The snow fell all afternoon, thick and relentless. By 4 o'clock, Camden Point was buried in a silent, heavy white. Callie bundled up, stepped out into the biting cold, and trudged to her 20-year-old sedan. She put the key in the ignition. A single, pathetic click, then nothing. The battery was dead. She slammed her gloved hands against the steering wheel, a sharp, hopeless sob catching in her throat. She was stranded. She had to get to Mrs. Petrov's. She had to get Rosie. A long, black shadow pulled up silently behind her. The Escalade. A moment later, Stefano was standing by her window, seemingly indifferent to the driving snow plastering his dark wool coat. He tapped on the glass. Callie rolled down the window, the manual crank protesting. "It won't start," she snapped, hating the quiver in her voice, hating the weakness. "I know," he said. "I will drive you. I'll call a taxi." "You will wait 2 hours in this weather," he stated, "and you need her car seat. I will not let you and your daughter wait for a taxi. I am driving you. Callie." The argument was pointless. He was right. The Escalade was impossibly warm, the silence on the way to Mrs. Petrov's was thick. When they arrived, Callie climbed into the back to unbuckle a sleepy Rosie before she could even begin to wrestle with the heavy, awkward car seat. Stefano was out of the driver's side and had opened her door. He didn't ask. He simply reached in, unhooked the latch clips with an efficient, strong click, and lifted the entire, heavy seat out himself. "I can get it," she stammered, juggling her daughter, who was a warm, limp weight against her chest. "I have it," he said. He carried the seat up the 3 flights of treacherous, snowy stairs to her apartment, Callie following in his wake. The gesture was so bizarrely, fundamentally domestic that she didn't know what to say. She fumbled with the key in her damaged lock. He took it from her cold fingers, applied a specific pressure, and the door swung open. He placed the car seat just inside the door. "Put her to bed," he said, his voice low. Callie did, laying Rosie, still in her snowsuit, on her small bed, kicking off her boots. When she returned to the tiny kitchen, he was still standing by the door. He filled the space, his broad shoulders seeming to touch both walls. The cold of the outside world radiated from his coat. The air between them was electric, compressed. "Thank you," she whispered, her arms crossed over her chest. "For the ride, and for this. You are welcome." He didn't move to leave. He just watched her. His dark eyes traced the line of her jaw, the chapped skin of her lips, the pulse fluttering in her throat. "You are shaking," he observed. "I'm just cold." He took a step, closing the small distance between them. He raised one hand, slowly, giving her time to retreat. She didn't. His fingers, surprisingly warm, brushed a damp tendril of hair from her cheek. His touch was feather-light. He leaned in. Callie's breath caught. Every instinct told her to run. This was the man the UCFD was watching. This was the Mafia. But he was also the man who had looked at Rosie's picture with such softness, who had carried her car seat up 3 flights of stairs. His lips met hers. It was not a kiss of passion, but of exploration. It was slow, deep, and devastatingly controlled. It was a question and an answer all in one. It held the promise of the power he was meticulously holding back. His other hand came to rest on the small of her back, a firm, possessive, grounding touch. It did not roam. It simply held her. In that moment, she was not a waitress, not a single mother in trouble. She was just a woman, and she was, for the first time in years, feeling utterly, completely seen. She was the one who broke it. Pulling back, her breath ragged, her hands were flat against the hard wall of his chest. "I can't," she gasped, though she hadn't tried to stop him. "Stefano, I have a child. She's in the next room. My life. Everything has to be slow." He did not try to kiss her again. He looked down at her, his expression unreadable in the dim light. His thumb brushed over her bottom lip, which was now damp and slightly swollen. "I know how to wait," he said. The official call came 2 days later. It was not a local number. "Miss Ortiz, this is Agent Davies, Urban Crime Field Division. We'd appreciate you coming down to the federal building in Philadelphia for a friendly exchange." It was said politely, but it was not a request. The building was a monument of glass and steel, designed to make a person feel small. Callie sat in a windowless gray room, a cup of terrible, bitter coffee untouched on the table in front of her. Agent Davies, the man from the card, entered with a female partner, Agent Chen. "Thank you for coming in, Callie. May we call you Callie?" Davies began, his voice deceptively paternal. "You've had a regular guest at the diner lately, a Mr. Stefano Puglisi." Callie's hands clenched in her lap. "He's a customer. He orders coffee." "He does," Davies agreed, opening a file. "He arrives most mornings at 8:10. He drives a black Escalade, New Jersey license plate." He read the full license plate number aloud. The blood drained from Callie's face. They hadn't just been to her apartment. They had been watching for weeks, long before that first rainy morning. "Mr. Puglisi is not just a customer." "Callie," Agent Chen said, her voice sharp and practical. "He's the new head of the Puglisi crime family. He's in a quiet war over the Camden port, and you, unfortunately, are standing right in the middle of it." "I'm a waitress," Callie whispered, her voice shaking. "I have nothing to do with this." "We believe you," Davies said, leaning forward, "and we want to keep it that way. Look, we know you're a single mom. We know about Rosie." At her daughter's name, Callie's head snapped up. "We know you're on the wait list for the public magnet kindergarten," Chen continued, picking up the thread. "The good one, the one with the decent rating. Those lists are long. A person can get lost on them for years, but they can also be reprioritized. A good word from a federal employee, noting a citizen's cooperation, can move a file right to the top." The offer hung in the sterile air. It was a classic American bribe, not with cash, but with life, with access, with a future for her daughter. "What do you want?" Callie asked, her throat dry. "Just your observations," Davies said smoothly. "What you hear, who he meets with. Nothing dangerous. We don't want you to plant a microphone. We just want you to listen. A man like Puglisi, Callie. He doesn't care about people like you. He uses them. He'll use you. And when you're no longer convenient, he will throw you away, help us, and you and Rosie are set up." Callie looked at their faces, their official badges, their government-issue suits. They were supposed to be the good guys, but they were threatening her daughter's future. He orders black coffee, Yaru, she said, her voice small but finding a core of steel. "He reads the paper, and he leaves a very big tip, that's all. I don't know anything else." Davies' smile was thin. "Very well, Miss Ortiz, but our offer stands. Think about Rosie. Think about how much easier her life could be." Callie walked out of the federal building, her legs feeling like water. That night, she was giving Rosie her bath when a knock came at her apartment door. Not the sharp, official rap of the agents, but a solid, polite knock. Her heart hammered. She wrapped Rosie in a towel and looked through the peephole. It was Stefano. She opened the door, her hand trembling on the knob. He was not in his suit. He wore dark, perfectly fitted jeans and a black cashmere sweater that made him look softer, more approachable, and somehow more dangerous. He held up a white pastry box tied with a neat red string. "I was in the neighborhood," he said, which they both knew was a lie. "This is from Dolce Vittoria. It's a bakery my cousin runs. I thought Rosie might like a treat." Rosie, her dark hair damp and curly, peeked out from behind Callie's legs. Stefano's gaze dropped to her, and his entire posture softened. He crouched, bringing himself down to her level. "Ciao, Piccolina," he said, his voice a low, gentle rumble. "I brought you a cannoli." Rosie giggled and took the box. Later, while Callie made coffee, real coffee, not the diner's brew, Stefano sat on her worn living room rug. He didn't talk down to Rosie. He just started stacking her old, faded wooden blocks. Uno, he said, placing a red block. No, that's one, Rosie corrected him, her mouth full of sweet ricotta. Si, he smiled. A genuine, warm smile that lit his dark eyes. Uno, one. He placed another. Two, she shrieked. Callie stood in the doorway of her kitchen, watching them. This man, who had feds watching his every move, who had rivals he fought in disagreements at the port, was sitting cross-legged on her floor, patiently teaching her daughter to count in Italian. He was building a crooked tower, and in that moment, he was the image of the father Rosie had never had. When Rosie was finally asleep, the apartment fell into a thick, charged silence. The only light came from the dim yellow bulb over the stove. Callie was at the sink, her back to him, her hands shaking as she washed the coffee mugs. Callie, she turned. He was standing by the old, faded sofa, his dark coat still on. You were with them today, he stated. It was not a question. She just nodded, the fear from the interrogation room rushing back. They offered to get Rosie into a good school if I watched you. He took a step toward her. And what did you tell them? That you drink black coffee, she whispered. He was in front of her now, his proximity overwhelming in the tiny kitchen. He raised his hand, not to strike, but to gently cup her jaw, his thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized was falling. They will not touch you again, he said, a vow so absolute it was terrifying. And they will not touch her. He pulled her, gently against him. She resisted for a half second, then sagged, burying her face in the soft, expensive wool of his sweater. He smelled of cologne in the cold night air. He just held her, one hand cradling the back of her head, his fingers threading into her damp hair, the other spread wide across her lower back. Look at me, he murmured. She did. He lowered his head and kissed her. This was not the tentative, exploratory kiss from before. This was deep and slow and certain. He tasted of coffee and a dark male warmth. His lips were firm but incredibly soft, moving against hers, taking, but also asking. He guided her backward, one step at a time, until the backs of her legs hit the old sofa. He eased her down, his body partially covering hers, his wool coat enveloping her. He kept his weight on his elbows, careful not to crush her. His hand moved from her back, sliding up her side, his thumb brushing the swell of her breast over the fabric of her t-shirt. He paused, his lips hovering an inch from hers. Is this okay? He breathed, his voice thick. She couldn't speak. She just nodded, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. His mouth left hers and trailed a hot, open-mouthed path down her jaw to the sensitive pulse point on her neck. A small, desperate sound escaped her. Callie's hands fisted in his sweater, then clutched his broad shoulders. She felt the coiled, hard muscle beneath the fabric, the body of a man familiar with violence, who was now being so agonizingly, incredibly gentle. Her world, which had been spinning with fear, was suddenly reduced to this one, solid, warm man. He was kissing her again, a slow, burning kiss that was building, pulling the tension from her body and replacing it with a different, hotter kind. When a sharp, electronic buzzing cut through the room, it was not a normal phone. Stefano froze. He pulled back instantly, his eyes dark, the passion vanishing, replaced by that cold, hard focus. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a blocky, severe device. He glanced at the screen, and a low curse left his lips. Damn it! He was off the sofa in one fluid motion, pulling her up with him. He was already at the door, shrugging his coat straight. His breathing was still heavy, his lips still red from hers. What is it? She asked, her own body still trembling. Warehouse 4, he said, his voice clipped and cold. The Bratva. They found one of my new lines. He turned at the door, his face a mask of controlled fury. He strode back, grabbed her by the chin and kissed her, hard and fast. It was a brand, a promise. Then he pressed his forehead to hers. Lock this door, he commanded, his voice low. Both locks. If anyone comes, anyone at all, you do not answer. If they ask you about me tomorrow, you know nothing. Do you understand? She just nodded, mute. He kissed her forehead, a gesture of pure protection, and then he was gone. Callie stood in the silence, her lips still tingling. She slid the deadbolt in the chain lock. She looked at Rosie's closed door, and then at the sofa. She had crossed a line. She had let the dawn of the Camden port into her home, into her life. She was no longer just the waitress. Miles away, in the rain-soaked container yard, a Russian lieutenant kicked a smoldering crate. "He's distracted," the man said. He tossed a small, glossy 4x6 photo onto the wet asphalt. It was a picture, taken from a long distance, grainy but clear. It showed Callie Ortiz in her blue diner uniform, laughing as she poured coffee. "Find out who she is," the lieutenant ordered. "Find his weakness." He did not ask again. Stefano simply arrived the next morning as she was dressing Rosie, his knock solid and final. He was not in the Escalade. He was driving a dark gray Mercedes sedan that looked anonymous and, to Callie's eye, even more expensive. "We are going," he said. It was not a request. "Stefano, I told you," she began, her voice already rising in panic. "I am not living with you. I can't be some kept woman in a high-rise. I have a life." "You have a life I intend to protect," he said, his voice cold and devoid of patience. "The men who attacked my warehouse are not disciplined. They are Russian. They do not play by the same rules. They know the feds are watching me. So they are looking for leverage. They are looking for you. You are coming." He bent down, picked up the small unicorn-themed bag Callie had packed just in case, and put it in Rosie's hand. The fight was over. They crossed the bridge into Philadelphia, the skyline gleaming in the cold morning light. He drove them to a sheer glass tower on the waterfront River East residences. The elevator was silent, opening not into a hallway, but directly into apartment 27B. The first thing that hit Callie was the view. An entire wall was glass, overlooking the Delaware River, the port, and the gray sprawl of Camden Point, which now looked like a forgotten toy town. The apartment was vast, minimalist and cold, beige leather sofas, chrome fixtures, and glass tables. It was beautiful, but it felt like a showroom, not a home. "I don't belong here, Stefano," she whispered, her resistance returning. "This isn't me." "This way," he said, ignoring her protest. He led her down a long, white hallway and pushed open a door at the end. Callie's hand flew to her mouth. The room was painted a soft, cheerful lemon yellow. A small white bed sat against one wall, and a low bookshelf was filled with brand-new picture books. A wooden toy chest was pushed into the corner. She stepped inside, her feet sinking into a plush white rug. She slowly opened the chest. It was filled with toys. Not just any toys. Wooden blocks, a set of cloth dolls, and several packages of hypoallergenic art supplies. She turned to him, her eyes wide with a dawning, terrifying realization. "When?" she breathed. "When did you do this?" "A few weeks ago," he said, his voice quiet, as if it were a simple matter of logistics. He hadn't decided to protect her yesterday. He had decided weeks ago. This was not a panicked reaction. It was a contingency plan. He had known his world would bleed into hers, and he had prepared for it. The sterile apartment became a strange, surreal bubble. They were a bizarre picture of domesticity. In the mornings, the massive, stainless steel kitchen filled with the sounds of two worlds colliding. Stefano would be at the complex, gleaming espresso machine, pulling tiny, potent cups of black coffee with the focus of a surgeon. Callie, in response, would be at the stove making American-style pancakes, flipping them onto a plate for Rosie, who sat at the huge marble island, swinging her legs. "More syrup," Mama, Rosie would demand. "Stefano, she's having too much sugar," Callie would say. "A little sweetness is good," he would rumble, pushing the bottle closer to Rosie, earning a conspiratorial giggle from the 5-year-old. One night, Rosie was fast asleep in her lemon-yellow room, and the reality of Callie's situation crashed down on her. She was sitting on the leather sofa, staring at the pinprick lights of the port, when she realized she had not been to work in 3 days. She hadn't even called. Sal would have fired her. That job, That small, grueling, tip-dependent job was her only tether to independence. She had no money, no job. She was, in fact, a kept woman. Panic, cold and sharp, seized her chest. Her breathing became shallow and fast. Stefano came out of the study, his phone in his hand. He saw the look on her face and was at her side in an instant. "Callie, what is it? Breathe." "My job," she gasped, the words tumbling out. "The diner, Sal, I didn't call. I didn't show up. I'm fired. I have nothing. Stefano, I have nothing." He didn't speak. He came around the sofa, stood behind her, and put his large, warm hands on her shoulders. He pulled her back, forcing her to lean against his solid, unyielding chest. He wrapped his arms around her, one hand spread flat across her stomach, the other gripping her shoulder, holding her together. He was a human shield. "Breathe," he murmured, his chin resting on the top of her head. "Just breathe." She sagged against him, the solidness of him anchoring her. "You don't understand," she whispered. "I need that job." "You don't work there anymore," he said, his voice a low vibration against her spine. She stiffened, pulling away. "What did you call them? Did you get me fired?" "No," he said. He sounded almost amused. "I bought the diner. Yesterday morning. It's being reorganized under a new holding company. You are listed as the new part-time shift leader. You have a 20% raise, and you are on indefinite, paid medical leave. You are fine." Callie turned in his arms to stare at him. He hadn't just solved her problem, he had bought it. He had erased her one piece of independence and replaced it with a gilded cage. It was the most terrifying, controlling, and absurdly protective thing anyone had ever done. Later that week, the rain returned, lashing against the 27th floor windows. Rosie was asleep. Callie, restless, came out of her room. She was wearing her own pajama shorts, but had pulled on one of Stefano's sweaters, a dark gray cashmere one he had left on a chair. It was ridiculously soft and swam on her, the sleeves covering her hands. He was standing by the floor-to-ceiling window, a glass of dark amber liquid in his hand, watching the storm over the port. He heard her and turned. His eyes darkened as they raked over her, taking in the sight of her small frame lost in his sweater. He set his glass down. He held out a hand. She went to him. He sat in the large armchair facing the window and gently tugged her, pulling her sideways onto his lap. She was curled against his chest, her head fitting perfectly in the hollow of his shoulder. The city lights blurred and fractured through the rain-streaked glass. His hand, large and warm, rested on her side, his thumb stroking back and forth, a slow, hypnotic motion. He kissed her temple, then her cheek. She turned her face, and their lips met. It was a long, slow kiss, as unhurried as the river below. There was no desperation, just a deep, unfolding certainty. Their breaths mingled, slow and steady. His hand slid from her side, tracing the line of her ribs through the soft wool. He made no move to push, to take more. He was just holding her, letting her set the pace, emboldened by his patience. Callie lifted her head slightly, her lips tracing the sharp line of his jaw, moving to the warm, smooth skin of his neck. A low sound vibrated in his chest, and his hand tightened on her hip, pulling her impossibly closer. This was not passion, it was sanctuary. After, he noticed the small, angry red line on the back of her hand. "What is this?" he asked, his voice low, his fingers tracing the wound. "It's nothing," she murmured. "A burn from a hot tray at the diner last week." He stood, lifting her to her feet, and led her to the massive marble bathroom. He sat her on the edge of the tub, and with the same focus he used on his espresso machine. He opened a first aid kit. He carefully cleaned the cut and applied a bandage, his touch surprisingly gentle. But the sanctuary was an illusion. Callie began to hear his phone calls. He spoke in his study, but his voice, when angered, carried. She heard clipped, cold phrases. "A wiretap warrant. The feds are getting desperate." And, "Tell me the FIPSC is on the payroll." And, "The Bratva are not just hitting cargo anymore. They are getting personal." The breach came from the most innocent source possible. Rosie had her weekly video call with her preschool teacher, a requirement for holding her spot on the kindergarten list. Callie was in the kitchen, but she heard Rosie's bright, clear voice. "I'm in a tall house with Mama and my friend, Uncle Stefano. We can see all the boats." Callie froze. The teacher, an innocent woman, just laughed. "Oh, that sounds wonderful." Rosie. But the information was out. It had traveled over the unencrypted internet. 2 hours later, Stefano was in his study. This time, his voice was not low. It was a cold, quiet roar. The door flew open and he stood there, his face pale and carved from stone. He was holding a piece of paper. "Stefano." "What is it?" Callie asked, her hand going to her throat. He didn't speak. He just handed her the paper. It was a fax, grainy and dark. It was a photograph. A man Callie did not recognize was holding Rosie's hand, leading her out of Mrs. Petrov's building. The photo was timestamped 3 days ago. The Russians hadn't just heard Rosie's call. They had already identified her. They had been close enough to touch her. Stefano looked at her, his eyes black with a promise of violence she had not yet seen. "This ends," he said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "I am ending this port war, now, before they think they can use her as a bargaining chip." The call from Agent Davies came on her burner phone, a simple, untraceable device Stefano had given her. The fact that Davies had the number sent a jolt of icy terror through her. "We were hoping you'd had time to reconsider." "Callie." His voice was smooth, but the pretense of friendliness was gone. "We know he moved you. River East Residences, apartment 27, bah, very nice. But it looks like a cage from here." He sent her a photo. It was a crystal-clear, high-resolution image of Rosie, her face tilted up, laughing in the sunlight. "This is from the security feed at the public preschool," Davies said, his voice hardening. "The one you're waitlisted for. We have influence there. We can protect your daughter's spot, or we can flag her application. A child living in the primary residence of a known organized crime figure. That's a child welfare concern. Wouldn't you say?" Callie had to sit down, her knees buckling. "What do you want?" "He's planning something big. A massive shipment. We need to know when. And we need to know what's in the containers. We have a device for you, a simple flash drive. Plug it into his laptop when he's not looking. That's all. You do that, you're a cooperating citizen, and Rosie's future is secure. You refuse. You're an accessory, and accessories. Callie. They lose custody." She ended the call, shaking so violently she dropped the phone. When Stefano came in, he found her on the floor, curled into a ball. She told him everything: the threat, the school, the flash drive. Stefano did not raise his voice. He did not punch a wall. A deep, Arctic cold emanated from him. He helped her to her feet, his hands surprisingly gentle, but his eyes were black and flat. "They threatened you," he said, stating a fact. They threatened her. He walked to the window, looking down at the city. "I will make them busy with other matters. They will have a different fire to put out." The promise was terrifying. The sanctuary of the penthouse evaporated. It was now his headquarters. That evening, 2 of his men arrived. They were not the silent bodyguards. These were his capos, his lieutenants. They stood in the immaculate living room, and Stefano did not ask Callie to leave. He wanted her to hear. "The Bratva warehouse on Pier 12, Stefano said, his voice low and measured. "The one they are using to stage their attacks. I want it gone. Burn it. I want a message, not a body count. Make sure the civilian night watchmen are out. Call in an anonymous tip if you have to. But by sunrise, I want it to be ash." "See, boss." The man named Leo said. Stefano looked at a thin file on the glass table. "And the FIPSC agent, the one on our payroll who has been leaking to the Russians and the feds? He's a problem." Leo agreed. "Then he's no longer a problem," Stefano said, his voice devoid of any emotion. "He needs to disappear. Permanently. I want him gone by midnight. I don't care how. Just handle it." Callie felt the blood drain from her face. This was not a movie. He had just, with the calm of a CEO discussing a hostile takeover, ordered a man killed. This was the other side of him, The man who carried her daughter's car seat and the man who erased human beings were the same person. When the men left, she confronted him, her voice trembling but fierce. You just told them to kill that man. I told them to solve a problem," Stefano corrected her, his voice hard. "He was a traitor. He was getting my men hurt. He was a threat to this family, to us." "And Agent Davies," she shot back, her fear making her reckless. "What about him if he follows through, if he calls child services, if he tries to take Rosie? Are you going to make him disappear, too?" The question hung in the air, a live wire. For the first time, Stefano looked truly thrown. He stared at her, the mask of the dawn cracking, revealing something raw and angry beneath. "When I was 9 years old," he said, his voice thick, "I lived in Brooklyn. My father, Antonio, he was a soldier. He ran a small pier at the Red Hook terminal. It was our family's. The Irish wanted it. They offered him money. He refused. It was a matter of honor." He turned away from her, looking out at the dark river. They waited. On a Sunday. "We were coming from church. My mother. She sent me ahead to buy pastries. I was 20 feet away. I heard the shots." He closed his eyes, his hands clenched at his sides. "They shot him on the church steps, Callie, in front of my mother. For a piece of the docks, I learned that day. You do not wait for them to come to your home. You do not let them threaten your family. You strike first. You strike so hard that they never, ever think of your name again." "What I do," he said, turning back to her, his eyes burning. "I do so that what happened to my father never happens to you, or to Rosie." She saw it then. He was not a sociopath. He was the product of a brutal system, a man forged in a tragedy that had dictated a simple, violent code: protect what is yours, at any cost. She understood, and it terrified her more than anything. As she stood there, processing the horror of his past, his encrypted phone buzzed, not his personal one, the one for business. He answered it, his voice instantly becoming clipped and professional. It was his lawyer. "Stefano, bad news. The feds just grabbed Slippy Vincenzo on an old parole violation." Stefano's body went rigid. "Slippy, he's just a driver. He knows nothing." "He's weak, boss," the lawyer said, his voice tinny over the speaker. "He's talking. My source at the precinct. He says Vincenzo just gave up a name. He told them about the diner widow he used to see you with. He gave them your name. Callie Ortiz." Callie felt the floor drop. Her name. Her full name was now in an official federal interrogation report. She was no longer a person of interest. She was an associate. Before either of them could speak, his other phone rang, the legitimate business line. He answered, his face a mask of stone. "Sit." He listened. "No, the deal is on. Thursday, as planned." He hung up. Callie stared at him, bewildered. "What are you doing? They know about me. They'll be waiting for you. For us. You have to cancel it." "I can't," he said, his voice flat. "It's a multi-million-dollar transaction. The feds know it's happening. They are letting it happen. They're planning to bust the entire operation, to catch me red-handed. And when they do," he said, finally looking at her, his eyes filled with a cold dread, "they will be at this door. They will arrest you as a co-conspirator. They'll take you to that same gray room, and they will not let you leave until you testify against me." She finally saw the checkmate. If he canceled the deal, his organization would collapse. The Bratva would see it as weakness and would descend. They would be hunted. If he didn't cancel, he was walking into a federal sting, and she, the single mother from Camden Point, would be taken right along with him, with Rosie left in the crossfire. He had to choose, his empire or her. Stefano's decision was absolute, made with the speed of a closing vault. He would not cancel, he would not hide, and he would not be taken. "We moved the exchange," he said. Not to Callie, but to his lieutenant, Leo, who had materialized in the apartment. "Not the main terminal, Redwater Pier, the old ferry depot. It's isolated, a perfect bottleneck. One road in, one road out. Our shooters control the high ground." His gaze shifted to Callie. The cold commander softened. Just barely, into the protector. You and Rosie cannot be here when this happens. You cannot be anywhere they associate with me. He was sending them away, not to a hotel, but to Belmare Parish, a quiet, old Italian church nestled in the hills of North Jersey. It was a place of stone and stained glass, run by two elderly nuns, two nuns who were his great-aunts, blood of his blood, Sister Sophia and Sister Alara. They were the only people on earth he trusted as much as himself. The night before the exchange, the atmosphere in the penthouse was suffocating. Rosie was asleep in her lemon-yellow room. Callie stood in the living room, watching Stefano. He was not wearing a suit. He was dressed in dark, functional trousers and a black shirt, a man preparing for physical work. He turned from the window, the city lights painting a stark silhouette behind him. He didn't offer comforting lies. He offered only brutal, practical truth. He held out a single, heavy-stock business card. "Angelo Vitali," he said. "He's my family's lawyer, my father's lawyer. If I'm not back by sunrise, or if you receive a call from anyone but me, you call this number. You tell him your name. He will handle everything, for you and for Rosie." Do you understand the words, "if I am not back," hung in the air, a physical weight? She couldn't speak. The reality of his world, of his potential death, was no longer an abstract concept. It was here, in this room, in the form of a lawyer's phone number. She didn't nod. She moved. She crossed the few feet between them and threw her arms around his neck, her hands fisting in his shirt, her face pressed hard against his chest. She breathed in the scent of him, trying to memorize it. His arms clamped around her, pulling her so tight against him it almost hurt. It was not a gentle embrace. It was a desperate, primal act of possession, of holding on. He pulled his head back just enough to find her lips. The kiss was not slow, nor was it about desire. It was short, hard, and choked with fear. It was a kiss that tasted of finality, of a desperate, last-minute plea to the universe. He was the one who broke it, resting his forehead against hers. "Be safe, Callie," he whispered. "For me." Hours later, Redwater Pier was a graveyard of rusting metal and concrete. The fog rolling off the Delaware River was so thick it muffled all sound. Stefano's men were in place, ghosts in the mist, two sharpshooters on the roof of the decaying ticket house, his capos hidden behind stacks of abandoned shipping containers. At precisely 2 a.m., the exchange began. A truck rumbled onto the pier, and then the world exploded. Blinding floodlights cut through the fog from all sides. UCFD federal agents, hands in the air, the metallic screech of a bullhorn echoed off the water. But the feds had fatally miscalculated. Before Stefano's men could even react, a new sound split the night, the distinct high-pitched report of automatic weapons, coming not from the feds, but from the water. The Bratva. The Russians had been listening, not just to Stefano, but to the federal frequencies. They had waited for the feds to spring their trap, intending to hit both enemies at once and take the cargo, the cash, and the glory. It was a three-way war. The pier became a lethal triangle of flashing muzzles. Bullets tore through the thin metal of the containers, pinging and whining in the darkness. Men shouted in 3 different languages, their voices swallowed by the chaos. Stefano was not a panicked soldier. He was a king on a battlefield. He took cover behind a concrete barrier, his weapon drawn. He was preternaturally calm, firing only in short, controlled bursts. "Leo," he yelled into a radio. "The west exit. They're flanking the west exit. Secure the route. Now." He was not trying to win. He was trying to survive, to get his men out. He laid down precise cover fire, protecting their retreat, his every move economical and deadly, miles away, in the cold. Silent rectory of Belmare Parish. Callie was pacing. She couldn't sleep. Sister Sophia, a tiny woman with eyes as sharp as Stefano's, had offered her tea, but Callie had declined. She had set up her phone on a small table, propped against a lamp, aimed at the cot where Rosie slept. It was on a video call, muted, just so she could watch her daughter breathe. She was staring at the grainy image when she saw it. The door to the small room on her phone screen creaked open. 2 men entered, dressed in dark clothing. They moved with a stealth that did not belong in a house of God. One of them, Callie recognized with a jolt of pure ice. It was the man from the photograph, the one who had been watching Mrs. Petrovs, the Russians. They had known about the ants. Callie's breath hitched. She fumbled for the unmute button. "Rosie!" she screamed into the phone. "Rosie, wake up!" The man closest to the cot whirled, startled by the voice. He saw the glowing screen. He lunged for it. The camera's view spun wildly, a blur of stone wall, the dark ceiling. Rosie's terrified, half-awake face, and then it went black as the phone hit the floor. Callie heard one thing before the connection died. Rosie's voice, a thin, piercing wail. "Mama, Mama, help!" The silence that followed was the loudest sound she had ever heard. For 1 second, she was frozen, her entire world collapsing into a black hole of terror. Then something else took over. Not fear, not despair, a pure, white-hot maternal rage that burned everything else to ash. She did not wait for Stefano. He was fighting his own war. She did not call the police. They were the ones who had threatened her. She sprinted from the room, past Sister Sophia, who was rising from her chair. "They took her," Callie yelled, grabbing the keys hanging from a hook by the rectory door. They were for the parish's old, unassuming gray hatchback. She burst out into the night, her feet slipping on the damp cobblestones. She saw it. A dark panel van, its lights off, squealing out of the long gravel driveway. She wrenched open the driver's side door of the hatchback, the engine catching on the second try. She slammed the car into gear, flooring the accelerator. The small car fishtailed, tires spitting gravel, and then shot forward into the darkness. She was just a waitress. She had no weapon, no plan, but she was a mother. She kept her eyes locked on the van's taillights, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. She raced down the winding roads, away from the safety of the parish, heading back toward the river, back toward the city, back toward the sound of gunfire she did not yet know she was driving into. The small parish hatchback was never designed for a high-speed chase. The engine whined in protest, but Callie kept her foot pressed to the floor, her entire world shrinking to the 2 red taillights of the Russian van. It swerved down the access roads, heading back toward the industrial wasteland of the port, a place she knew from her pre-dawn drives to the diner. The van finally veered, cutting through a chain-link fence and sliding to a stop in the shadow of a massive, derelict building, Redwater Storage, Warehouse 12, a place rumored to be a defunct meat-packing plant, a cold storage facility. Callie killed her lights and coasted the car into a ditch, her heart hammering against her ribs. She didn't charge the front. Years of waiting tables had taught her one thing: every building has a back way. There was the main entrance, where the customers went, and there was the service entrance, where the real work was done. She moved in the shadows, her sneakers silent on the wet asphalt. She found it a steel employee door, propped open just a crack with an old pipe. She slipped inside, into a pitch-black corridor that smelled of rust and spoiled meat. Her waitress skills took over. She moved with a practiced, economical stealth, the way she used to navigate a crowded diner floor without bumping a single chair. Her eyes adjusted, picking out shapes in the gloom. She memorized the layout: main corridor, 2 doors on the left, a large opening at the end. She heard their voices, harsh and guttural, echoing from the large room. She crept forward, hiding behind a rack of empty, rusted hooks, and she saw her. They were in the main freezer room. The massive, insulated doors were wide open. The leader, the man she recognized from the photo, was on his satellite phone, pacing. Rosie was not in a chair. A second man held her, his hand clamped over her mouth. Her eyes were wide with terror, tears streaming silently down her face. Callie made eye contact. Rosie's eyes widened. If possible, even more. Callie pressed one finger to her own lips. "Hush, baby, Mama's here." The leader was shouting into the phone. "Puglisi, you are a hard man to reach. The feds are a problem for both of us. Hey, but I have a new asset. You have a choice. It is very simple. The Camden port, or this new family you are hiding." A moment of silence, and then a harsh laugh. "You have 10 minutes. Redwater 12. Or she pays the price for your ambition. He hung up. Just as the sound of a car screaming to a halt echoed from outside, Stefano's Mercedes, now riddled with bullet holes, skidded to a stop on the gravel. He stumbled out, his shirt torn, a long, bleeding gash over his right eye. Only 2 men were left with him, Leo and 1 other. They were armed, but they were out of time. At that exact second, from the main road, a swarm of black SUVs, sirens wailing, flooded the complex. The glare of federal floodlights turned the night into a hellish, artificial day. UCFD, we have the building surrounded. Agent Davies's voice boomed over a bullhorn. Put your weapons down. The Russian leader, Dmitri, grabbed Rosie, dragging her and the other man onto the loading dock into the full glare of the lights. He pressed the muzzle of his gun to Rosie's small head. Puglisi, he screamed. Feds everyone you see the first person who moves. She dies. It was a perfect, terrible stalemate. Stefano stepped out from behind his car, his hands raised, his weapon still in his hand. He was breathing heavily, blood dripping into his eye. He looked past the feds, past everything, his gaze locking on Rosie. He saw her terror. He saw Callie, a shadow of movement in the darkness behind the leader, and his blood ran cold. Puglisi, drop your weapon now, Davies yelled. Stefano ignored him. He looked straight at Dmitri. His face, which had been a mask of rage, went completely calm. He unclipped his weapon from its holster. With a slow, deliberate movement, he let the heavy black pistol drop from his fingers. It hit the wet asphalt with a loud, final clatter. It was the ultimate surrender, an act no boss in his world would ever commit. You win, Stefano said, his voice carrying, clear and steady across the space. Take the docks. They're yours. He took 1 step forward, his hands empty and open. I take my family. Dmitri stared, stunned for a second by the totality of his victory. A slow, cruel smile spread across his face. He had won. He had broken the new dawn of Philadelphia. He started to lower his gun from Rosie's head. But first, Dmitri snarled, his eyes finding Callie, who was frozen in the doorway. A price for all this trouble? He raised his gun again, his aim shifting, pointing it directly at Callie's chest. No, Stefano roared. He moved. He was not a man, but an animal. Launching himself across the dock, he threw his body in front of Callie, shoving her and Rosie back, shielding them with his own. The gun fired. The sound was a flat, deafening crack. Stefano cried out, a sharp, choked gasp, as the bullet tore through the flesh of his left shoulder. He collapsed against Callie, a dead weight, his hand flying to the wound. Hot, dark blood instantly poured through his fingers. The world went red. Callie saw the blood. She saw Stefano's face contorted in pain. She saw Rosie screaming. The third Russian, the one who had been holding Rosie, was momentarily distracted, staring at his boss. His sidearm was holstered. Callie lunged. She was not a fighter. She was not a killer. She was a mother. She grabbed the heavy gun from the man's holster, her fingers fumbling but finding the grip. She ripped it free. Dmitri was turning, surprised, raising his weapon to finish the job. Callie screamed, a sound of pure, primal rage, and pointed the gun. She didn't aim for his head. She didn't aim for his chest. She aimed low. She pulled the trigger once, twice. The explosions were deafening. Dmitri screamed, a high-pitched, agonizing sound, and crumpled to the ground, clutching his shattered thigh. UCFD move in. Federal agents swarmed the dock, a sea of black tactical gear. They stopped dead. The scene was pure chaos. The Bratva leader was on the ground, bleeding. 2 of his men were surrendering. And Stefano Puglisi, the primary target, was on his knees, wounded. His arms wrapped around a terrified waitress and a crying child, shielding them from the feds themselves. Agent Davies froze, his gun raised. This was not the narrative. The ruthless mafia boss was the victim, protecting his family. The civilian waitress was the one holding a smoking gun. Stefano, grimacing in pain, pushed himself to his feet. He never let go of Callie, pulling her and Rosie behind him, placing his wounded body between them and the federal agents. He looked past the grunts, his eyes locking on Agent Davies. His voice was a low gasp, but it cut through the noise. Davies, Puglisi, Davies said, his face a mask of confusion and anger. You are under arrest. No, Stefano said, shaking his head. Your report, it's going to be very simple. Tonight, the UCFD, with a tip from my organization, took down the entire Bratva del Porto leadership. You caught them in the act of kidnapping and attempted murder. You're a hero. I can't... That's not what happened, Davies stammered. It is, Stefano insisted, the force of his will holding him upright. You get the biggest bust this city has seen in 10 years. The Bratva is gone, and my family. We leave. You have no evidence on me. Look at me. I'm unarmed. This, he motioned to Dimitri, was self-defense. My girlfriend was protecting her child. You have nothing. Davies looked at the scene. He looked at the wounded Dimitri. He looked at the shipment truck, which was empty. He looked at Callie, who was visibly a victim. He looked at Rosie, wrapped in Callie's arms. A three-way firefight with civilian casualties and a dead mafia boss was a nightmare of paperwork. A joint operation to capture the Bratva was a career-making promotion. Stefano was right. Agent Davies slowly, reluctantly lowered his weapon. His face was twisted in disgust, but it was the disgust of a pragmatist. I didn't see you here tonight, Puglisi, Davies spat. Get medical attention for your man, he barked at the other agents, pointing at Dimitri. And get them, he motioned to Stefano and Callie. Out of my sight. The fallout at Redwater Pier was immediate, though not in the way Callie had feared. The local news stations fed a carefully curated narrative by a triumphant UCFD, reported on a massive multi-agency operation that had successfully dismantled a violent Eastern European trafficking ring. The Philadelphia Inquirer called it a vicious gangland dispute, focusing entirely on the hospitalized and arrested Bratva members. Callie Ortiz was not a name. Stefano Puglisi was not mentioned. He had, with the help of his lawyers, made himself a ghost. He had lost the Redwater deal, a temporary concession of port territory worth millions. But as he sat in the River East penthouse, his left arm bound in a sleek, black sling, he watched Rosie on the floor, stacking her wooden blocks. He had kept what mattered. 2 weeks later, his shoulder healed enough to wear a suit. He made his choice public. He drove Callie and Rosie, not to the city, but to Villa Morena, the sprawling, old-world Puglisi estate on the Jersey shore. It was a fortress of pale stone and sea air, a place of generational power, a Sunday dinner. The long table was set for 20. Callie, in the simple black dress he had bought her, felt the weight of their stares. At the head of the table sat his mother, Signora Livia, a formidable woman in dark silk, her hair pulled back in a severe silver knot. Her eyes were Stefano's, but colder, assessing Callie with open suspicion. A waitress, a non-Italian, a single mother with baggage. The meal was tense. Then, over coffee, Stefano spoke. He did not raise his voice, but he spoke in fluent, rapid Italian, and the room went silent. He told them what had happened. He told them the Bratva had found his weakness. He told them they had taken the Bambina. And then he told them how Callie, alone, unarmed, had followed them. How she had faced Dimitri, how she had disarmed one of his men, and how, when he himself had been shot, she had been the one to end the fight. Signora Livia's expression, which had been pure ice, slowly changed. This was not the weak American girl she had imagined. This was a lupa, a she-wolf protecting a cub. After the story, the old woman rose from her chair, walked to Callie, and took her hand. She said nothing. She simply slid a heavy, ancient gold chain from her own wrist onto Callie's. It was not a gift. It was an investiture. Back at the penthouse, the air felt different. Final. I want you and Rosie to stay here, Stefano said, standing by the window. This is your home. Callie crossed her arms, the gold chain heavy on her wrist. I will not be a kept woman, Stefano. I can't live in your gilded cage, waiting for you to come home. He nodded, as if he had expected this. Then don't be. The apartment is owned by Puglisi Atlantic. We will draw up a lease agreement. You will pay rent, $100 a month. It will be a legal contract. He was respecting her, finding a way to meet her pride halfway. but I will not have you in that old apartment. It is not safe." She thought for a moment, then nodded. "Okay, on one condition." "Name it." "I keep my job." A slow smile touched his lips. "I assumed you would." The Harbor Light Diner was gone. In its place, a sign of tasteful, brushed aluminum read the Harbor Light Cafe Bakery. The old vinyl booths were gone, replaced by dark wood tables. A gleaming new espresso machine sat on the counter. It was still, technically, owned by a holding company belonging to Stefano, but it was her domain. She was the manager. The tips were better. That night, the city was quiet. Rosie was fast asleep in her lemon-yellow room, now filled with picture books about the ocean. The rain had started again, a soft tapping against the terrace doors. Stefano stood outside, his back to the room, the wind from the river ruffling his hair. His sling was gone. Callie came out wearing one of his gray cashmere sweaters, the wool soft against her skin. He turned as she approached, the cold air hitting her face. He said nothing. He just reached out, pulling her into his arms, flush against his chest, shielding her from the wind. He backed her against the cold glass of the terrace door. He kissed her. It was not the desperate, fearful kiss from before the battle. It was not the controlled, exploratory kiss from her kitchen. This was a kiss of deep, slow, and absolute possession. It was the kiss of a man who had almost lost everything and would never let it go again. His hands tangled in her hair, tilting her head back. His lips parting hers. Their breath mingled, tasting of the river's salt air. It was the slow, steady kiss of survivors, a new reality settling into place. She pulled back, just enough to speak, her voice a whisper against his lips. "I am still not comfortable with it." He did not have to ask what she meant. "The other part of your life, the man who disappeared, the orders you give." He rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed. "I cannot change what I am, Callie, this world," he said, his voice a low rumble. "It is the only way I know how to keep you both safe. It is the only way I know." "But I won't be in the dark," she insisted, her voice fierce. "I won't be hidden away, ignorant of the danger, ever again." He pulled back to look at her, his eyes intense in the dim city light. "No, you will not. From now on, any decision I make that affects this apartment, that affects you or Rosie, I will tell you first. You will have a voice. You have the right to say no." It was an unprecedented, revolutionary promise for a man in his world. A letter had arrived that morning. It was on thick, official cardstock from the Department of Justice. It was a sterile, formal note from Agent Davies, thanking Callie for her cooperation in providing background context regarding port activities. It was a truce, a way for them to close their file on her while saving face, but it was also a warning. "We know where you are. We are still watching." The next morning, bright sunlight streamed into the penthouse kitchen. Stefano sat at the marble island reading a financial report. Callie, dressed for her shift at the new cafe, poured a cup of coffee from a sleek French press. She slid the heavy ceramic mug in front of him. She looked at the man she was serving. It was the same action she had performed weeks ago in the small, greasy diner, her hand shaking. But everything had changed. She was no longer the servant, fearful of the man in the window. She was the woman who had stood by his side, who had shot his enemy. She was pouring this coffee not for a tip, but because he was her partner. He was the father of her child in all but blood. Callie was not blind. She knew the darkness in his world. She knew what his hands were capable of ordering. But she had made her choice. She had chosen the man who, when faced with the ultimate decision between his empire and his family, had dropped his gun. He had chosen her child over the port, for a single mother in the unstable, unforgiving reality of modern America. That was the most profound, the most real, and the most dangerous romance of all. Thank you so much for listening to this story. We would love to know where in the world you are listening from, so please share your thoughts and where you are in the comments below. Be sure to subscribe to Mafia Boss Stories, like this video, and give us extra support by hitting that hype button to help this story reach more listeners.